Hi, this is Adam Stofsky from Briefly, and we are here for the next edition of the Inland Counties Legal Services Legal Information video series. And we're here with Darrell Moore. Darrell is a very experienced housing lawyer. Hey, Darrell, how are you?
I'm doing well, Adam. Thank you for having me back.
So today we're going to talk about the issue of leases, actually. This is, in the context of evictions, my understanding is are really about the breaking of a lease, an agreement between a landlord and a tenant. And I think it's important to understand what a lease even is. So let me just start with that question, Darrell. What is a lease?
A lease, thank you, Adam. A lease is an agreement between you as the tenant and the landlord. And the idea of the agreement is it spells out the basic rules of the road, if you will, that are going to govern this relationship. Leases are incredibly significant because this is where the court, the judge, is going to look first to determine what the rights and responsibilities of the parties are. So, a foundational critical document to the landlord-tenant relationship.
So just as a sort of basic question, when I've signed leases, it's been like a piece of paper, a few pieces of paper stapled together, and it has a bunch of stuff in it, and I sign my name. Is that what most leases look like? Does a lease have to be like a written out contract, or can you actually just kind of have a verbal agreement or kind of shake a hand and say, I'm going to live here for a little while, I'll pay you this much? Can it be all those things?
It can be, it runs the gamut. It goes from oral agreements to handwritten one-page agreements to agreements the landlord found off the internet. It can be, we have in California, the California Department of Real Estate, and we see a lot of leases that are 14, 15 pages long that cover everything from A to Z, very formal document. So you get the whole gamut there.
Okay. All right. Well, so do you recommend, though, for most tenants having a written agreement, or is it okay to just go kind of do a handshake?
Well, as the attorney who is working in eviction court every day, I will tell you some of the case types that I most dislike to see. And that is anything to do with oral agreements, cash transactions, no receipt for a transaction. So, no, I would not say that an oral agreement, although legally enforceable, is the preferred way to go. You are much, much, much better off having a written agreement.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So what are the kind of key? What is it important to know about a lease? Like I said, what are the most important lease terms that any tenant should kind of learn how to identify and understand? Because it's a contract. You're signing a contract, right? So you should kind of understand the basics. What are some of the most important terms in a lease that folks should understand?
Yeah, great question. And we can spend a lot of time on that. But what are the big highlights with it? Keeping in mind the broad umbrella. This agreement is spelling out your rights and your responsibilities with respect to that landlord tenant relationship. So you're going to see some basic things. Who's the tenant? Well, who is the tenant? How many people are going to be living there? How many people are authorized to live there? These can become very big issues. You should have a very clear understanding with a landlord who is going to be living in the place when you actually do rent it. And then, of course, you're going to have the basics. How much is your rent? How much is your deposit? When is the rent due? What happens if you don't pay the rent on time? And then, who is responsible for fees? We're seeing lots of fees, utility fees, uh, car fees, pet fees, all kind. Can you have a pet? All kinds of fees. So you want to know what are all the obligations you're signing up for. And then what happens if you fall behind in your rent and then they have to bring an eviction case? Well, you might be signing a lease that will give the landlord the right to collect their attorney's fees and court costs if they have to initiate an eviction case against you. So there's a whole section, generally speaking, regarding remedies if things go wrong in a well-written lease.
Is it possible for a tenant to renting a place to actually negotiate that stuff with the landlord? Do you see this?
Wonderful question. Is it possible? Is it possible? Yes. You're entering into, theoretically speaking, an arm's length transaction with your landlord. You should approach it with the view that every term is negotiable. Now, in our real world that we live in, there are some landlords that have very strong bargaining position, and they will basically tell you it's my way or the highway. And then you have to make a decision. Are you going to sign up for that or not? If you don't like those rules, then my goodness, don't get into an agreement with rules you know at the outset you don't like. Look around, look for a landlord where you can get to a more comfortable arrangement and live with rules that you can live with.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice. Because I mean, if you don't like the rules, and certainly if you can't follow them, right? So if you have, your stepchildren are coming to live with you, and the landlord's only expecting one child. I mean, these are things that could really create a problem.
You are you are not going to ultimately prevail in that regard. I see this day in and day out in eviction court. If the rules are well known to you and you do not conform your conduct to adhering to those rules, it will not go well for you in eviction court.
Man,
So,
yeah.
yeah, do not sign up for a lease when you're going into a situation with rules you know you don't like, or as Adam suggests, that you know you can't comply with. So you're setting yourself up for failure. Don't do it.
All right, I have a few more questions about. Well, one of them I think is very important. This is confusing. The lease term. We talk about the different elements of the lease being terms. We're talking about the, excuse me, the term, the duration of the lease. Can you talk a bit about that? What is a lease term? What are some common lease terms, and how does it work?
Um, so, when we talk about leases, generally speaking, what is the motivation both for the landlord and the tenant to enter into a written lease? That word lease usually connotes a specified period of time that the landlord is obligating him or herself to renting this space to you. And at the same time, it's the tenant is saying, I am signing up for 12 months. I'm signing up for a 12-month lease. And during that period of time, absent good cause, there is no way that that relationship can be terminated. That's the value of entering into a lease with a specified fixed term.
Yeah, you got it for a year as long as you follow the rules of the lease.
You have it for a year. That's generally speaking what we see as a 1 year lease, and you have it for a year as long as you follow the rules. And then, generally speaking, two things are going to happen. Three possible things at the end of the year. One, the landlord decides that they need to take the property back, then you haven't done anything wrong, but according to the agreement you signed up for, hey, the property is going back to the landlord. Generally speaking, that doesn't happen too often. One of two other things happen. Your lease has come up, your 1 year is done. Now it's time to renew your lease and sign up for another 1 year period of time. Or, third thing that could possibly happen is you and the landlord really don't talk about it, and you just continue to pay your rent, and the landlord continues to accept your rent. And now you've sort of changed the character of that relationship a bit, and now it's called a month to month tenancy.
So what does that mean?
Again, when we're getting these more heightened protections in the agreement uh, governing the landlord tenant relationship, is becoming less and less significant, but it's still significant. What most courts will do is saying if you've gone to a um, month to month arrangement, they will incorporate those terms from the written lease, even though you did not sign up for the lease. But keep in mind, we don't want to leave things to chance if we don't have to. Every court officer can look at that issue a little bit differently. And so what I prefer is that we are all on the same page. We all agree what's happening. That's how you want to start out a relationship. And so for me, my preference, hey, unless there's some objectionable reason why that you would not enter into another lease, my preference is to renew the lease. And therefore, you don't have to ask the bench officer to decide for you what's the agreement. You've already agreed to it.
We keep talking about the tenant has all these rules to follow and they can be evicted. But what do you do as a tenant? Because if the landlord's not doing what they promised, I mean, they promised to do some things as well. Just broadly, can you describe what happens in that situation?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Adam. So yeah, I know we always talk about the tenant's responsibilities. Of course, the landlord has a tenant responsibilities. And again, they're going to be found in that written lease if it's well prepared. If it's not well prepared, then of course the landlord might be a little bit silent about what it is that they're responsible for. So be on guard for that. But the most basic, right, thing that I talk to people on a day-to-day basis is the landlord is failing to properly maintain the property. This is a big one. And it's not an automatic win for tenants. If I can do nothing else, please let me emphasize that if you feel like you're living in a rental situation in which the landlord has not done what they're supposed to do relative to habitability, know some things here. One, the landlord is required to keep the place habitable. Well, what does that mean? That means you, the tenant, cannot be contributing to any problems that are causing that rental unit to be substandard or below the habitability requirements. So watch your own conduct. You're not creating the problem, right? So if we're past that and you think there are some problems with habitability, know that California state law spells out what the areas of concern are relative to habitability. And they're big ticket items. Running water, heating, weatherization of the property, locking of the being secure, roach infestation, right? These are big, bright light things.
Great. All right, Darrell, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Adam. I really want to encourage people, hey, if you're out there listening to this, reach out to us. We'll do what we can to help you.
All right, thanks so much.